Welcome to the gold standard here on the 440 Sports Network and YouTube page, Twitter account, and Facebook as well. My name is Braden Gall, and you can get to me on twitter.com at Braden Gall.
And I'm Michael Gallagher with Nashville Hockey Now. You can get to me on Twitter at MGSports_.
And I'm Emma Lingan with the Hockey News, and you can get to me at Emma_Lingan.
The comment section is open back by, I guess, popular demand, or maybe no one wanted this at all, but we are still here live and on video for you guys, and we will continue to try to do this. I think Wednesdays at 9 a.m. is a good time, despite what our compatriot over there at It's All Your Fault with the Nashville scene of the Nashville Post, Jeremy K. Gover, asking, begging, pleading for the show to be in the afternoon. Sorry, doesn't work for us. So we might try to do. We might try to keep this up on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. through the offseason. It also works probably during the season as well. So we'll try to do this as much as possible. And, of course, if you guys want to jump into the comment section, it is open. So please jump in, because today is about sunbows, unishine, and raincorns. That's right. All positivity on the show today, because I think when you look at what we're going to do is look at the whole season. Year one AD after David. We've got Andrew Brunette as a first-year coach. We got Barry Trotz as a first-year general manager. We have trade deadline stuff from last year mixed with the draft and the offseason this past summer, and then, of course, what they accomplished during the course of the season. So outside of the playoff series loss, which I am okay with if you are still pissed about 5 days later, I think it's okay that if you're a Preds fan and you are frustrated by missed opportunities and losing a series that you could have won, I don't think you have to move on in 5 days if you don't want to. But we're going to try to help ease the pain a little bit today on the show.
Good job.
Dumbfounded. I thought Emma was all positivity. She's riding unicorns around in Germantown.
Listen, I was until recently as in the last 24 hours, I am still getting bullied. I don't use that word lightly, bullied by sore winner Canucks fans. I'm like, yes, you won. Congratulations. Take your dub and move on. I don't get it.
Thanks a lot, Thomas Strands.
How dare you quote the coach?
How dare I do my job? It's insane. Yeah. So anyway, we're not talking about that series. Thank God. Doesn't matter who was supposed to win or who could have won. Vancouver did win, and we move on.
I also love the people that comment and they're like, yeah, we beat your guys' asses, as if we have some investment in what the Predators do. I don't care if they win or lose. If they win, great. I get to cover more. If they lose, you know what? There's still drama to write about. We have no investment as journalists in the team. So, and
not only did we have nothing to do with it, but they had nothing to do with the Canucks winning. So stop acting like it's an accomplishment. Anyway, yes.
I will never, ever, ever stop you guys from making this show the pettiest Predators show on the internet. I would never stop you from that. I am in favor of that. In fact, we're going to spend at least 30 minutes talking about nicknames and Twitter handles on the back of jerseys today. So I'm here. I'm here for how petty we can be and we should be. But folks, if you're going to be on the comment section and be in the comments when we're live and you want to interact and have conversation, huge respect. That's why we're doing this. We want you guys to be involved in the show. If it is a British Columbia internet comment bomb from thousands of miles away that doesn't care about who cares? Who cares? Just ignore all of them. It doesn't matter. They were talking shit about the anthem singers. I saw Little Big Town and Billy Strings do anthems. That's a combined 100 Grammys. Billy Strings is one of the greatest musicians I've ever seen pick up an instrument. Don't tell me that Vancouver people are being rational right now. Celebrate, have your win, and it's fine. It's great, but let's not live in the comment section. It's not real life. I just want to warn everybody.
I know they're not being rational, and it's not like I'm losing sleep over it. But it's one thing. I don't know. For me personally, I do not resort to blocking people on Twitter very quickly. If anything, I've muted.
I don't either.
I've muted a lot of people, but you got to do something pretty egregious for me to block you on Twitter. And by egregious, I mean, attack me personally or attack someone I care about personally, or call me names. And I will just say I had to use that block button quite a bit last night with these Canucks fans, because there were They were saying things about me that I will not repeat on this show because my parents listen to it. So I'm just
Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Lingan.
just for doing my job and quoting what the coach said at the press conference. Again, like Mike said, we're not fans. I'm not a fan. I'm not here arguing anything. It's just
goes without saying.
Yeah. Anyway, it should go without saying.
It goes without saying. So ultimately, Nate here says sort of the big picture comments. I don't care where the Preds were projected to be at the beginning of the season. It wasn't a success due to being the same the past 5 seasons, barely squeaking into the playoffs and being bounced. That is what we are going to discuss for the vast majority of the show. Perspective. And again, I understand if 5 days later you are not prepared to move on to big picture as a fan, that is your right, your prerogative, etc. I'm okay with that. I think it is fair to take a step back, even though it's just 5 days later, and look at the entire big picture. I had to force both of you guys to stop looking at the big picture on the last episode. So it's only fair that that's all we do today. Now, before we do that, of course, if you are on YouTube, give us a little thumbs up, subscribe. If you're listening to us on the podcast, give us a review. If you give us 5 stars, we will read it on the show. I guarantee you that. And of course, if you're on Twitter or Facebook, please give us a share. It's all about engagement, folks. I do want to know, you guys were at Locker Cleanout Day. You're at the press conference for Andrew Brunette and for Barry Trotz, who, of course, did like a 7-minute soliloquy to open this the press conference, as Barry Trotz wants to do.
That was brief for him.
Yeah.
I know. Although people don't realize how long 7 minutes of straight talking at a press conference is. That's a long.
Not if you're Barry Trotz.
The thing about Barry Trotz is you ask him one question and he'll answer it, but he'll also answer 6 more questions in that answer, like questions you didn't even know you had.
So
and it's great.
I think Brunette and Trotz combined, their media availability was about 40 minutes of just answering questions. In the past with Poyle and whoever the coach is, it's been capped at 30, if you even get to 30.
So there's one major overwhelming theme that seemed to present itself that I think is going to dominate off-season conversations. We'll get to that in a second. But I wanted to get your perspectives, both of you guys, since you were there talking to the players. Not everybody was available, but it sounds like the vast majority of the big guns were available. UC Saros, Roman Josi, Philip Forsberg. There was a lot of big guys there. Some guys that you'd like to talk to weren't, but for some other reasons that maybe are okay. But I just wanted to get your sense. I've been to plenty of these. Sometimes it's really, really depressing to look into a player's face after 82 games in a playoff series and just see how the weight of the season and how much it is weighed on them physically. This was a little different because they didn't expect to be here, but they got there. They played really well, but probably didn't finish the job. So I could see almost the balance of the big picture and the short term in both Andrew Brunette and Barry Trotz's responses yesterday. You could see them actively trying to balance, damn, we let one get away, but also we really like where we're going. And so I'm curious about the players. What was the energy and sort of your general takeaway from talking to all the players on Cleanout Day?
I compare it to last year's Cleanout Day, and the vibes I thought were much better this year. Last year's Cleanout Day was one of the most depressing media availabilities I think I've ever been to. And I think that had largely to do with the fact that it was the first time Ryan McDonough had ever lost or ever not made the playoffs. And he just kind of cast a pall over the entire room. But I think, I don't know, it felt generally positive. Of course, let me just say, none of them were happy to be talking to us now. They weren't happy that they didn't get it done in the first round. But I think with players at least talking about big picture, it was a lot more positive, and a lot more, they liked the progress that they made this year, and they, it's looking good for next year, especially compared to last year. And I think Luke Evangelista was the one who said it, that there was a more set culture around the team this year, just because last year everything changed. So many veterans got traded or bought out, whatever, and then they had a new coach, a new GM. There was so much that was changing, and now they feel a little bit more at ease with the way everything is now. And I think it allows them to get more comfortable and really feel good about what they're doing.
Yeah, the mood wasn't really somber in a sense of like depressing like it was last year. Like it was really bad last year. And I think it should be just because going into that offseason there were so many questions, so much stuff was like hanging over everyone's head. There was so much uncertainty. This year the somberness was more about like, man, we really should have had that playoff series. And Andrew Brunette even said that. He said this was like one of maybe 2 times he'd ever left a best of 7 series thinking that the better team didn't win.
Okay, everybody go bully Michael now, because that's the quote that I tweeted and everyone's yelling at me for.
Are you encouraging bullying? Is that what I just heard?
No.
Hey,
I'm
I
discouraging
tweeted it too, and no one was bullying me. So I guess you're just taking all the
Emma's
strays.
Emma's big in BC, man. She's big in BC.
We do
For all
have a
the
large
wrong
BC
reasons.
audience.
For all the wrong reasons, apparently.
She's bigger than both of us, Michael and BC. That's for sure.
But yeah, Andrew Brunette said that. That was in fact a real quote said by the human head coach. Like I don't know why people have a problem with that, but and I agree. Like if you look at the series, you can make a strong case the Predators should have won. So there was the disappointment of not winning a series that pretty much everybody on the team felt they were capable of winning. But I think the atmosphere in the locker room, it was almost, I don't know what word you'd use to describe it, but it was almost like relief. Like going into last year's offseason, going into training camp, once Barry Trotz took over, once Andrew Brunette was named the head coach, everyone, like, there was all this buzz and excitement, like, oh, everything's new, we don't really know what to expect, what's going on. Now everyone knows what's expected of them. They've all had a season in the system. They know how to play the system. They all admitted that it took them a little bit longer to grasp the system and get the cohesion going than they would have liked. Especially Cody Glass. He said he finally got the hang of how to play probably the last 12 games, and he said he wished he would have figured that out at the beginning of the year, not the end of the year. But I think there was almost a relief of like, okay, we know what to expect. We know how Brunette coaches. We know what Barry Trotz wants. And I think from the 18 game point streak on, that is the type of play that they want to use and they want to have going into next season. So I think there was kind of some hopefulness knowing like, okay, we finally got a hold of the system. We know how to do it. We know what's expected of everybody. So next year, it's going to be a full season or close to a full season, you would hope, of what the 18 game point streak was and not all the games that led up to it.
So we've got a lot of questions. Nate, Dale, Josh, we're going to get to all you guys. So just sit tight with those questions. Those are all very, very poignant questions. I do think, and it seems like this is what Predators fans are struggling with just based on what I'm seeing in the comments, which is that two things can be true at the same time right now in the immediacy and the aftermath of the series, which is, again, that you have a right to be pissed off that they missed an opportunity to really do something fun and special. And also understand stepping back, and this is where I think Preds fans maybe in our comments are not there yet, that you have to step back, and I think there's no way to define this season other than as a major success because of all of the transition that took place starting at the trade deadline 2 seasons ago. So I think when we look at and trying to break down the entire big picture direction of the franchise, there's only one area that I'm going to bring up today where I have concern, and it's not even like honestly like a fail grade. It's more of an incomplete grade. So I'll get to that coming up, because I think if you were looking at the two most important things that the franchise did over the course of the last 18 months, it is David Poile stepping down and passing the baton to Barry Trotz and hiring Andrew Brunette over John Hines. Those are the two most important things this franchise has arguably done in years. If like one of the most important moments in franchise history when all of that happened. And in no way, shape, or form can you look at those two moves. This is the Sunbows, Unishine, and Raincorns. There's no possible way to define either of those two decisions right now after one season. I'm not saying after 3 seasons or 5 seasons, but right now, there is no way to define those things as anything other than massive successes. To go from the winningest general manager in history to Barry Trotz, to look at every move Barry Trotz has made, starting with sort of signing off on some of the trades that took place at the deadline 2 years ago, going through and looking at the free agent signings, Gus Nyquist and Ryan O'Reilly, and yes, Luke Shen, put the whole thing down, put all the contracts down. He hired a Jack Adams finalist that got them, that overachieved in not only the regular season, but even in the postseason. If you're talking about defining the season in through those two decisions, which are the most important decisions of the season, I don't know how the season can be defined as anything other than a massive success. I understand the fans that are pissed off about the Vancouver series. I'm totally fine with that. But I don't think you can, if you truly step back and give yourself a chance to take a deep breath, those two decisions, we'll get to some other stuff here, but those two decisions are the starting point. And I think they're A+ moves. If you're grading them on this, internet grading scale that we like to put together, it's A+ for Barry Trotz. It's A+ for Andrew Brunette. And I don't know how else you could define it.
Yeah, I think with both of those guys, I'm having a little bit of a hard time. Like, again, I agree with Braden that it's hard. You really, yes, be pissed off about the Vancouver series because the Preds were right there. They were right there in that series, and they easily could have won it. So yes, be pissed off about that. But I have a hard time with the people who are complaining about, oh, it's the same shit every year. Like, it's the same story as before because, we get to the playoffs and we lose in the first round. But for all the reasons you just said, Braden, it's literally not the same. It's not the same story because they, okay, yes, Barry Trotz and Andrew Brunette come in for year one. This is year one after 24 years of the same, before. And so I think that to expect those two guys to completely turn everything around and like, what did you expect this year? I understand, again, losing in the first round the way they did lose this year is very frustrating. But what did you realistically expect with everything? Frankly, this was a better finish than I think anyone was expecting.
Yeah.
At the start of the year. So I have a hard time with people who are complaining about it being, just the same old thing again every year. It's like, well, yeah, they need to undo 24 years of what came before them. And that's not going to happen overnight. And so I think that, yes, like looking at Barry Trotz, I think that he's done an excellent job. Looking at Andrew Brunette, I think he's done an excellent job. One thing that really struck me about Andrew Brunette in particular, really throughout the playoff series especially, but just in general, listening to him speak after losses and after, disappointing performances is what a healthy perspective he has. This guy has been through it, as a player, a coach, a scout, an executive. He's done everything. And Barry Trotz even said that yesterday in his press conference about that's why he went out and hired Andrew Brunette, is because he's done it all and he has such a healthy perspective about these things. And so I think he's definitely the right guy to lead this team at this juncture in their history, just because you can't get too caught up in the moment or too down after one season or one game or whatever. I know that's oversimplifying it a little bit, but I think that you have to have that healthy perspective. And I think that he brings that.
Also agree too. I understand fans' frustration with getting into the first round and losing, but to Emma's point, like, it's not the same shit every year. Philip Forsberg just set the franchise goals record. Like, we found out that not only is Luke Evangelista like an NHL player, he's probably going to be a really good NHL player. This was a huge developmental year for him, and it wasn't just like, oh, the team sucked and we found out he could score. Like, the team was good, they made the playoffs, and we found out he could score. Like, we found out that Spencer Stastny is an NHL defenseman, and he's probably going to be on this roster next year. Like, we learned a lot about this team. So to sit here and to just chalk it up because they lost in the first round, like, oh, it's the same shit, different year. Like, to me, that is people speaking with their emotions and not just objectively looking at the season as a whole. We learned a lot about the players. We learned a lot about the head coach. We learned a lot about the GM. And what I like is the transparency that is with this new regime. Andrew Brunette is very forthcoming with giving answers. We saw yesterday with what he said about Cody Glass and Philip Tomasino. Like, he's not afraid to, I don't want to say call those players out, but he's not afraid to publicly challenge them. That's something that John Hines was kind of hesitant to do, even when he was asked about Cody Glass sending him to the AHL, and he was just like, I don't have time to teach him. This isn't a developmental league. That's pretty much all he said and moved on. Like, Andrew Brunette's going into what he's looking for from Cody Glass. He went into what he's looking for specifically from Philip Tomasino. And Barry Trotz is the same way. Barry Trotz, he even talked about, talking with Saros and Lingan, and he said that Askarov is almost NHL ready, but you can't over marinate a goaltender in the AHL. Like,
I like that line. I like that line. You can't over marinate a goaltender. I was like, interesting. Okay, like some fresh herbs. All right. Okay, some Worcestershire. I got it.
Yeah. So the transparency that the head coach and GM give all of us now, and just the access and stuff. Like, I can't remember a time where I've asked to speak with Andrew Brunette after a practice or asked to speak to Barry Trotz and I was told no. Like, before John Hines was kind of probably hesitant to do some media interviews and stuff, and David Poile was very busy and all that. But I think just the fact that they're so forthcoming with what's going on behind the scenes, like that in itself is a change. The culture shift is a change. Like, so I understand, like, yes, the results are the same, but this is not the same team. It's not run the same way. And like everything that goes into this, it's not the same shit different year. People need to let that go, because thinking that way, you're just going to sit there and just stew in your anger.
Yeah, Andrew Brunette and Barry Trotz overcoming institutional hurdles. Josh Wright says, I think seeing success with a new system and establishing a new culture shows success, even if the big results isn't there. I think that's ultimately what we're saying. He also comes...
Healthy perspective.
Yeah, it is.
Thank
Good job,
you, Josh.
Also says, I appreciate that Trotz acknowledged getting out of the mushy middle, which again, also, they weren't supposed to be in the mushy middle this year. Like,
they were supposed to be at the bottom.
They were supposed to be in the rock bottom, not like the mushy middle. They're
supposed to be drafting Macklin Celebrini.
Right. Now, you don't say stuff like that, because that's like, that's the whole point of what they're arguing, is that we should be down there drafting players like that. So I think there's a couple other good questions here that we're going to get to, because a lot of it is about the direction of the roster, which we'll get to at the end of the show today. But Dale says the Preds were supposed to get younger and gain more experience. Vange and Stasny are really the only young guys that got experience. The rest of the team was older. Even Glass, who was on the roster, didn't play. So we'll get to that in a second, because I do think there's a big conversation to be had about that part of this year. Josh also comments and says, I'm really curious to see where the roster goes. There are at least 6 guys in Milwaukee that could get looks or are close, but guys like Sherwood and Zucker may have earned spots. Earned spots on the roster. We'll get to the UFAs and the guys that are going to walk and guys that they might try to re-sign. But I do think if you just start with the big two, I think we all agree huge A's, A pluses on the two most important and critical decisions about the franchise, which is Barry Trotz taking over as the general manager for David Poile and Andrew Brunette taking over as the head coach. I think, again, no possible way, in my opinion, to argue anything other than very high-level success, A plus, whatever internet grade you want to put on them. I do think there are two interesting conversations, because the one thing that I noticed, and it was the first 4 questions to UC Saros, and I think it was the first question to Barry Trotz, which is about the future of the goaltender. I know, Emma, you and Gover talked about it on It's All Your Fault. Gover was a little bit more critical of the first 4 games of UC Saros. He is the most overworked goaltender in the NHL the last 3 years. I think that's part of this equation. He was bad against Arizona in the postseason. That was an asterisk COVID year. I think he was very good against Carolina, and I think he was pretty solid against Vancouver. I thought there were moments where he carried the team, and other moments where he could have been better. But I think by and large, when you have a 2.02 goals against average against a division champion and a 90% save percentage, you're giving your team a chance to win. Certainly the power, he gave the team a chance to win in a lot of different spots. He was injured, of course, because of being overworked against Colorado in the Colorado series. So if you want to take into account the last 3 seasons and how overworked he's been, the most starts in the NHL 3 straight years, and the injury to Colorado and the bad series to Arizona, I think we can have a conversation about, I think it's fair to say objectively, it's never happened. He's never won a series. It's never physically happened. There's no evidence that it's happened. I think if you step back from that, we can say, look, UC Saros is still one of the better goaltenders in the NHL. He's still under contract. He is going to be an extremely valuable trade chip in the offseason and in the regular season next year. So I think it seems like, correct me, you guys tell me what you think, but I think the Saros situation, the contract with Askarov, and I think we can discuss Lingan in here in a second, but it seems like he is going to dominate our conversations over the course of the summer. Yeah,
I think, what Barry Trotz said yesterday, I don't think came as a surprise, at least not to me, that, the priority remains, they would like him to stay, and UC wants to stay. And that, we know that. And I think that at least, Barry Trotz says this, and I am inclined to believe him because of the way that he behaved at the trade deadline, that he is not going to just, he is well aware of how valuable UC Saros is. And so I don't think, again, we did talk about it on It's All Your Fault, and I love you, Gover, but UC Saros is not getting traded 1-for-1 for Mitch Marner. Because Mitch Marner makes way more money than Barry Trotz is
Dover
willing.
knows better than that.
Hey,
also, Mitch
take it up
Marner's
with him.
Mitch Marner's worth a lot more than I think Saros. I don't think you can get Marner for 1-for-1. But anyway, let's not talk about that. I'm more looking at the big picture of the season.
Yes.
UC Saros took a small step back and did not prove himself officially in the postseason. That's what I'm saying. Like, based on the whole season, he didn't prove himself in the postseason because he didn't carry a team to a win, which is not all his fault. Not all his fault.
No.
But he took a step back in the regular seasons, production-wise.
And so did a lot of guys, though.
Sure. I'm just saying.
I will say, too, that I asked him, with all the forwards and defensemen struggling to grasp the new system, if it was a challenge for him. And he did admit at the beginning of the year it was tough because the game looked different than what he'd been used to. So that I'm not excusing his struggles at the beginning of the year, but he did admit that at least factored into it.
Yeah, I think it just a lot of people, and it's, looking at his numbers from this year, from the regular season, and saying that, oh, he had an awful year. I kind of think that's low hanging fruit because you need to look at not just him, but the guys playing in front of him. And again, it's not to make excuses and say that he would have won the Vezina this year if John Hines was still coaching. But I just think that
that's a weird sentence.
No, but I'm saying that I think that obviously we talked a lot about the new system and what Andrew Brunette has brought in. And, theoretically that shouldn't impact the goalie and the way that the goalie plays, but it does, because if you're used to a certain system and you're, like Mike said, you're used to seeing the game a certain way in front of you for so long, and then it very suddenly changes. Like, I think we give him the grace and we give him the space to adjust to that, just like we had to give the rest of the team space to adjust to the new system, because it's a lot and it's different. And I think, again, I think that it's still a priority for this team to try to keep him. If they can get that done, I know he wants to stay. And I think, yes, and this is not me saying that I think keeping Saros is more important than getting scoring in the lineup, because I don't think that's true. But if we're looking at a trade, a potential trade, there really isn't anyone who is, very visibly on the trade block right now that I would rather have than UC Saros on my team.
We are still not in a trade of Saros to get a winning piece situation. Like, that's the whole point of the fans saying, hey, I'm glad we're not in the mushy we don't want to be in the mushy middle. It's like, no, this is still a rebuild mode, like a rebuild move, excuse me. If they trade UC Saros, it needs to be for things that makes them better long term, which is maybe a top flight draft pick, maybe it's an elite prospect, maybe it is a young player with term under contract with a good deal. But it can't be for a star player that, quote unquote, puts you over the top, because without Saros, you're not over the top.
Yeah, I think
if you're trading Saros, if you get a roster player back, he's got to be 24 or younger. You're not trading Saros for McKinnon. Not that would ever happen, or a Marner. You're not trading for someone who's 28, 29 and is already a superstar, because that doesn't help this team.
No, and I think that, we've seen this year how players, even really good players, superstar players, take time to adjust to the system that Brunette wants them to play. And I think that it's easier to do that. It's not easy, but it's easier to kind of condition a guy and mold a guy when he's younger and not used to playing a certain way. I also just think that, again, I'm a broken record now. I've done this, I've been saying this all year, but we know that I'm a champion for UC Saros, and I think that he should stay. But I think a lot of people just really do not understand, like, especially people who've been Predators fans, for a while, especially in the last few years. Even like from going before Saros, going back to Pekka when he was the starter, I think Predators fans are just so accustomed to having great goaltending, and they're so used to it that it becomes a given. And it's like, oh, we don't have to worry about that. We got to focus on the scoring, and we need more scoring. Yes, you do need more scoring. That's for sure true. But I think that you can't overlook. It's kind of the same argument that Andrew Brunette made about Roman Josi, is like, well, he's been doing this for so long, he kind of gets overlooked, and people don't make a big deal out of it. And that's how I feel about the Predators goaltending, is that people don't appreciate it the way that they should.
It is a great problem to have a Vezina caliber goaltender in the middle of his prime years of his career on an affordable contract that you might be able to bring back to your team. And then to be debating whether or not that's a luxury item or not, because you've got the top prospect in the NHL from a goaltender standpoint, maybe one of the top two, whatever. I think that is that's a good problem to have if you're a Predators fan. If you are just grading this season, and again, that sounds very like internet listicle thing, but like if you're just grading this season with UC Saros, it's hard to say. Like I don't think it changed my opinion of him too much. I think the body of work for him is established. I think he's an excellent goaltender. But when you add context, like, hey, we've got Askarov coming up, or hey, his price might go up 35 or 40% from $5 million to $8 million. Hey, he's going to be 33 by the end of that contract or whatever. Like, you start adding context, and the decision does become a little bit more difficult because, again, the injury to Colorado cannot be, and missing that entire series, it cannot be removed from his resume. It's on there. The 5-11 record is on the resume. Many of these things are not his fault. He didn't choose to get started more than anyone else in the NHL the last 3 years. Players don't say no to starting games. They're not like UC's not like, no, I need to sit this one out. Like that's not how they work. And so it's not all his fault that he's the most overworked goaltender in the NHL the last 3 years, and that we continue to talk about the size of his body and the frame and the overworkedness and the injury to Colorado, and if he wore down at all during this season with Andrew Brunette's system. I think this season for Saros is sort of like a B or a B minus. Like I don't think it changed my opinion of him much, but it certainly didn't establish that he is worth $9 million a year and worth trading Askarov away. I think I think when you look at the whole body of work, there still is arguments on both sides to why you use him to fast track your rebuild, or you use him to continue to try to fight for playoff wins. Like you can go either way here. It's a good problem to have.
I think what fans struggle with is it's hard to be content with what you have when it's really good, when you have something that could potentially be better waiting in the pipeline. And Braden, you might appreciate this analogy. It was probably hard for Packers fans to be excited about the last couple of years of Brett Favre when you have Aaron Rodgers waiting in the wings. And I feel like it's similar. It's hard to be excited about Saros when you have Askarov waiting in the wings, especially if you're going to have to pay Saros $8.5 million a year, whatever he's asking for. It's going to be close to what Connor Hellebuyck got. Like, you're just going to have to be okay with that. And I think that's what's tough for Barry Trotz. There's no question Barry Trotz wants Saros back, but does he want him back for $8 million a year, or would he rather have him back for $7.25 million a year? Is there middle ground anywhere? I think that factors into the discussion. And if Saros does get traded, I don't think it has anything to do with kickstarting the rebuild, the haul he's bringing back. I think if he gets traded, it has a lot to do with they don't want to pay him $8 million a year, because Trotz said, I believe it was last February when he had his first official press conference where they were talking about ushering him in, replacing Poile. I think he said, like, the days of giving out big money contracts with long terms to potential players is kind of over for now. And I think he was taking a shot at the Ryan Johansson, David Poile, Matt Duchene situation and stuff. But I think he said if players are going, what I insinuated from that is, players are going to get that much money, they're going to have to earn it. And I'm not saying Saros hasn't earned it, but I think in Trotz's mind, he maybe hasn't, if that makes sense.
No, I think he has. I just think Michael, you took away the opportunity cost from the return on a trade. You can't do that. Like, it's all got to be factored into the formula.
No, I get that, but I'm saying if they trade Saros, if they trade Saros, it has more to do with the fact of they don't want to pay him the salary than it is like, oh, we could go get Mitch Marner for UC Saros. Okay, so we have all offseason to debate a lot of these moves, and I think up until the draft, I think Saros isn't going anywhere. In fact, I don't think he's going anywhere this offseason at all. If anything, maybe the deadline next year, but even then, I think we're going to work to get a deal done. So we got all offseason to debate that. But this season in particular, from the 23-24 season, I don't think I guess maybe this is a better question. Did anything this season push Barry Trotz or Andrew Brunette to make a different type of decision with UC Saros? And I don't think that anything did. If anything, it's still an incomplete picture, as much as it can be for a guy that we know a lot about. Does that make sense? Like, what did this season do to UC Saros' future? He certainly didn't cement
the fact that he deserves $9 million a year for 5 more years. Like, he didn't cement that, but
Well,
I don't think it was a negative either, if that makes sense.
Here's my question though. Let's say, like, I remember that too when Barry said about, like, we're not giving out these giant contracts anymore. We're done with that unless guys earn them. So my question is, okay, maybe the Predators don't want to give UC Saros $8 million a year for 5 years or whatever. Is there a team out there that will give him that? Because right now, like, especially if you're just looking at this last year, which again, I know we're not only doing that, but I mean, it's hard for me to think of a team out there, even teams that really need good goaltending. Like, I don't know if anyone would give him that. And I think that the only way that he goes to a team other than the Predators is if they are willing to give him that. And I mean, right now, looking at the landscape, I don't know that there's a team out there who would pay him hellebuck money, even if he does deserve it.
I don't think you're wrong on this. If they were to give him, and I think that's why the contract could be a quote deal, right? I know that Poyle was very good at the hometown discount thing. It appears with the Tommy Novak contract, although postseason notwithstanding, it seems like he did a pretty good job kind of getting Tommy Novak, maybe even a little undervalue there. If it's a 3-year, $21 million deal, I'm on board. Like, I'm on board with that. I think that's a fair compromise. It's the 5-year, $40 million deal that I think pigeonholes you into a problem 3 years from now when you have a Askarov ready to go, and Saros is not ready to leave the contract, but he's not worth as much on the deadline. So
you know what? I'm already getting bullied on the internet, so I'm just going to full send it and anger some Predators fans too.
Hang on. James says, also, huge compliment to all the Nashville media for the honest coverage after the exit. Lots of honest analysis of what it takes to construct a contender, not just entertainment. Thank you, James.
Thank you, James.
We appreciate you, James.
Please go talk to the people in Vancouver because they need some help.
Teach them how to be winners.
James, go fix Twitter, please.
They need to go touch grass. My God. Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm going to anger some Preds fans, but I do not think, and I'm not saying that never, I'm saying right now, I do not think Yaroslav Askarov is ready for the NHL. I don't think, after listening to Barry Trotz talking yesterday, I don't think he's convinced that Askarov is ready for the NHL.
He said it. He's
not
ready.
And I know people are excited about him.
James, very smart. He's not on Twitter.
Yeah.
Continue. Sorry.
I love that for you, James.
Must be nice.
Yeah, it's always great when I tell people about what people are saying to me on Twitter, and they're like, well, just just don't look at it. I'm like, I have to do my job. Anyway. So I think with Askarov, yes, he's very fun to watch. He has very high entertainment value. He makes those crazy saves. He bench presses the goal. He does like all the crazy shit that's fun to watch. I get that, but I don't think that Trotz is sold on his theatrics, like especially at the NHL level. I
hope that's not a factor. I hope he embraces that.
No,
I think it is.
He is the goal. He's the goalie Nashville needs.
No, he's not. UC Saros is.
No. I'm just saying. Like, I love we're a personality market. We're a PK Subban market.
Okay,
we're a market that likes that stuff.
This goes to what our good friend James was saying, is that I think that you need to, like, I don't know, it's not just about creating entertainment value, and like entertainment value is a factor here, but I think that Barry Trotz wants to get that entertainment value from guys who can score goals, not guys in net. And I think that, again, I'm not saying that alone, like those theatrics, are going to be the only thing that keeps Askarov out of the NHL. I'm not saying that at all. I just think that you need to see more of a work ethic and and I'm not saying he doesn't work hard, but like I think that he needs to grow a little bit on and off the ice before, and I think that fans seeing him now and seeing him make these crazy highlight reel saves, that those are just highlight reels. I'm not saying that he's not a fantastic goaltender, because he is, but you need to I think fans are being way too quick to be like, all right, well, screw Saros, let's bring this guy up, because I think that it takes a lot more.
It's almost as if Saros had like 2 more years on his deal, like we wouldn't even be having a conversation. It would all just be perfectly lined up. Like it's all because of the year and the timing of it all.
I want to add in there too. I agree and I disagree with Emma to a point. And I do think she's right. Like, I don't think Trotz is sold that Askarov is NHL ready yet. However, far be it for me to disagree with Barry Trotz. Guy knows more about hockey than I ever will. From what I've seen from him, I do think he's NHL ready. But I will say, I don't think he's 64 starts NHL ready. You're not expecting him to go and start for Saros. Is he 20, 25 game ready for the NHL? I think he is. Like, if you bring him up to the roster next year, you're not starting him over Saros. Like, and even if you trade him, you're not bringing up Askarov to be the starter. You're probably going to bring Kevin Lingan back and do a platoon with him, or you're going to go sign another veteran and you're going to have a 1A, 1B situation.
Yeah.
I do think that Trotz, I'm not saying he has an issue with the theatrics of Askarov. I do think some of that stuff, kind of the showmanship, kind of rubs him the wrong way because Barry Trotz isn't like that and he's never been about that. And from what I heard at the draft last year, the showmanship of Askarov is partially what led Trotz to be okay with dangling him out there to try to move up into the top 5. I'm not saying that Trotz hates that Askarov is funny and goofy and has his personality, but I think that he's okay with trading a player like that because he maybe necessarily doesn't act the way of what Barry Trotz thinks a Nashville Predator should. So It's not all of it, but I'm saying that is a factor into this. But if Askarov is up here next year and he's backing up Saros, it's not because I mean, I don't think he has anything left to prove in the AHL. He's done everything he can. He's one of the top 5 goalies down there. I think he's ready for a 20, 25 game workload where he's the backup. He's starting the second half of the back-to-backs and stuff like that.
And that's what I meant when I said I don't think he's NHL ready. I don't think he's ready to be an NHL starter. Like, he's
definitely not.
And
I think we all agree on that.
But can we also just talk about how Barry Trotz kind of dropped that little mini bomb during the press conference yesterday and said that he's talked to Lingan's representation and that he would also like to come back? That complicates things further.
Yeah, so here's a question from Brandon. Says Trotz said yesterday he wants to re-sign all of the UFAs. How much of that is lip service? There's no way he actually wants to re-sign Tyson Barrie, right? We'll get to that. Tease on Tyson Barrie, answer no.
Well, he's not going to sit there and be like, I want to bring everybody back, like except for Kiefer Sherwood. I fucking hate that guy, man.
No. It's lip service, but I've got the list of 7 or 8 guys here, and we'll get to them at the end of the show. But because I want to move on from Saros, we have the entire offseason to discuss Askarov, Saros, because Lingan is a more interesting element to this, which is more pressing, which we're going to get to when it comes to the free agents here in just a second. But I want to ask one more, because I would not grade Saros as like a huge A or a fail. I would sort of grade him as like a B-. I would say he had a fine season, but that he didn't like sort of prove or disprove anything. I think he just was a pretty solid goaltender. It was not one of his best seasons. Statistically, one of his worst. He played great in a couple of spots in the playoff series, had a couple of really bad moments. He's been injured before. I don't think we learned... I don't think the book on Saros changed at all this year, honestly, because it certainly didn't get better. That's ultimately my point.
He actually had more wins and more shutouts than he did last year, FYI.
The one other thing, and this speaks to some of the earlier commenters in the show, and I think this is the one area where I would look at this team and I might be critical of the entire picture of the big picture season. And that is the youth development was supposed to be one of the top priorities. When we started the season, it was, look, they've got all these guys in Milwaukee. They've got all these guys on the team. This is going to be a fun offensive system. We are going to put them all in a position to grow and develop over the course of 82 games. And absolutely that happened for Luke Evangelista. I think he has proven he belongs as a starting player in the NHL and has showed he got better. And I think despite some adversity in the postseason being put on him in a situational standpoint, he proved himself. Tommy Novak got the contract done, kind of proved that last year wasn't necessarily a fluke, that he can contribute like that. They gave him the deal, playoff series notwithstanding. I think Evangelista and Novak proved themselves. Maybe Spencer Stastny has proved himself in part of this.
But there's no maybe, he did.
Fair. But ultimately, there's about a list of 9 or 10 people at the beginning of the season that we would have all circled and said, these are the important pieces that need to develop. The vast majority of those pieces did not step forward on the NHL level. I'm not saying they didn't have big seasons in Milwaukee or they didn't develop and learn some skills, but when you look at Cody Glass, when you look at Philip Tomasino, when you look at Juuso Parssinen, all went backwards. The guys that we thought maybe could have been called up, Afanasiev or Kemmel or on and on down the list of guys, did not become NHL players. So ultimately, I want to ask you guys here, your thoughts on the team. Like, all the stuff that happened was all the really old guys. All the good stuff that happened was the top line. All the good stuff that happened was Yossi and McDonough. All the good stuff was the veterans. What about, again, I'm acknowledging Evangelista was a huge development this year, and I'm acknowledging that Novak was a pretty solid development this year. But outside of those guys, the whole story was these guys need to develop, and that didn't really happen as much as I think fans would have hoped this season.
I think that's a little bit short-sighted to look at it that way. I'm not saying that they didn't develop or that they did develop. I'm saying if you want to look at it as this year is the year that we're going to learn about these guys and whether they have a future here, I think we did learn a lot. And I think we learned even more yesterday listening to Barry Trotz talking. I think that, yes, different guys took steps backwards, but it was all different reasons. And it wasn't like, I don't know. I just don't think that it was all the same. And I mean, if you look at like both Barry Trotz, well, mostly Andrew Brunette, had some things to say about Philip Tomasino yesterday that makes me think that he may not be back here. And you know, that's fine. That's okay, because if you look at what this year was supposed to be, and we're going to learn which guys fit into the puzzle here and which guys don't, then that's important information. That's valuable information to have. Got a guy like Parsonen, for example, I think he is a very good fit for the system, and I think that he will contribute in a big way. I just think he needed more time. I think with a little more time in the AHL that he will get there. Tomasino, it sounds like that may not be the case. Cody Glass, also different story. I mean, injuries and setbacks, and he did start to get it like towards the end, but it was a little too late. And, you know, listening to him talk yesterday, he is a man on a mission. He's going to go train his ass off this summer, and he wants to make sure that that never happens again. What happened this year, especially being in the last year of his deal. And so I'm not saying that he's going to come back and score 40 goals, but I think that even if we didn't see guys develop per se into what we wanted them to, I still think we learned a lot about who fits on this team, who doesn't, and what we're going to see in the future.
I want to give you space, Michael, but Dale points this out. Novak isn't young. That's obviously not necessarily what I meant. What I mean is like the unproven, inexperienced, and yes, some of them very young players. And I agree with you, Emma. The idea is to learn what they are. If Tomasino is not back on the team, then yes, they learned something. Evangelista is worth it. They learned something. I don't think they learned, like, you cannot tell me that this group of players, Michael, was a passing grade this year, because I still don't think we learned. Like, we still don't know what Juuso Parsonen's going to be. You're guessing, Emma, on what Cody Glass is going to be. We did not learn the things we needed to learn about some of these guys. And I don't know. You pay more attention to the AHL, but LaRue, Afanasiev, Kemmel, Svechkov, like, they all played well in the AHL, but we don't know what they are in the NHL.
None of those guys are NHL ready either.
They're not ready.
And that's what I want to talk about. Like, this narrative that this was supposed to be a young team. Like, yes, I get it. It's a rebuild. You want to go with the young guys. Trotz and Brunette had to reverse course in the middle of the season because those guys weren't ready. It wasn't like they started the year like piping out, oh, rebuild, young guys, and then all of a sudden they're like, just kidding, we're going to go back to the David Poile way of trying to make the playoffs. We saw 44 games, Juuso Parsinen was not ready. We saw 41 games, Philip Tomasino was not ready. We saw 41 games, Cody Glass wasn't ready, injured, dealing with a lot of stuff in between the years. Like, a lot of the mental game got to Cody Glass.
Isn't that bad for the team?
Yeah, but also
that's a bad thing, right?
But you're also
just for this year. But that doesn't mean they'll never be ready.
They're not lost.
Fair.
It's not lost hope for all of them. But you're also asking Andrew Brunette to come in and take guys that David Poile acquired and John Hines coached, and then fit them into his system and do it all within a 3-week period of training camp. And it was unrealistic. I think going to the AHL was good for Parson. I think it was good for Tomasino. And I think whether Tomasino handles what Andrew Brunette said about him the right way or the wrong way will not just his future with the Predators, it's going to determine his NHL future. Because if he doesn't have a thick skin and take that as a challenge and not less my coach is throwing me under the bus, then Tomasino might not be an NHL player. And I say that as someone who loves Philip Tomasino. I love watching him play. I think he's got all the skills in the world, and I hope he puts it all together. But we saw they started the year. The plan was to go young guys, Parson and Tomasino, Glass, and yeah, Tommy Novak's not a young guy, but he turned 27 this year, so he's
inexperienced.
He's not old. Yeah. We also saw Liam Foudy, we saw Samuel Fagimo, Delgaizo, Stastny. We saw them get some of the younger guys up, and you know what? When they weren't panning out, they sent them to the AHL, which is the developmental league where you're supposed to go in and fine tune everything. So I wouldn't give the young guys a passing grade by any means, because I think there's still a lot of stuff that needs to be worked out. But I'm not going to rush to judge them all. Like, it doesn't concern me that Parson and Tomasino got sent down to the AHL, because you know what? They played the last couple of years under a John Hines system, which is vastly different than what Andrew Brunette is wanting to do. And Cody Glass even admitted, he was like, I didn't think it was going to be as hard as it was. He's like, we play a lot faster. We're more aggressive. He was like, the year before, talking about when John Hines was the coach, he's like, we kind of sat back. We were more of a defensive team. We kind of let the game come to us. And now we're out attacking the game. And if you're 22, 23, 24, and you haven't played that way, and Barry Trotz even said at the beginning of the year, Carl Taylor even acknowledged it. He said that, like, it's a hard system to play. It's tough on your body. You have to condition yourself. You can have all the skills you need, but if you don't have the right frame of mind to execute it, you're not going to be successful. So I'm not concerned that these guys got sent to the AHL. I think Parson, maybe Tomasino, and Cody Glass will be fine next year. But the guys you mentioned, LaRue, Svechkov, Kemmel, all those guys, they're not NHL ready. We need to stop trying to rush these young guys to the NHL because they're the shiny.
Wait a second. That was you. That was you in the preseason saying Afanasyev's ready and I hope Kemmel gets called up.
Afanasyev is not.
No.
Afanasyev is not LaRue.
We're not putting words in my mouth. I said Afanasyev is ready, and I still stand by that.
Okay. All right.
I never said Kemmel was ready. Let's call him up. I said he could get a couple games at the end of the year, but I have been the one person advocating throughout the entire year, beating the drum that Joachim Kemmel is not NHL ready right now. I have fought people on Twitter that he is not NHL ready. I don't think LaRue is ready. I don't think Svechkov's ready. I don't really think anyone on the Milwaukee Admirals roster, aside from Igor Afanasyev, is NHL ready. And that's not just because he scored the most goals this year or whatever. Like, he's been on the doorstep the last couple of years. And he's just been a victim of the numbers game. Okay. And I even and one more on Afanasyev. I read a report. I'll have to have Clay translate it because it was in Russian. And I want to dig some more deeper into this. But I read a report that if he doesn't get a contract offer that he views will lead to an NHL roster spot next year, he could be leaving and going back to Russia. So you have to consider that too. Do you find a spot for Afanasyev, or are you okay losing him to Russia?
Doesn't seem like a great country to go live in right now, but that's just me. It is a wonderful country normally.
I also think that I completely agree, Michael. I think that's a great point, that there is no one down in Milwaukee who would have been a better alternative than what was on the roster this year. And I think going back to Luka just right now, that doesn't mean never. A lot of those guys,
but that's all I'm saying is, like,
hold on. A lot of those guys that you just mentioned, LaRue, Svechkov, Kemmel, this was their first year in the AHL.
They're in their first year of their ELCs. You can't expect these guys to pop off. Like, they're not 23, 24-year-olds. They're 19, 20-year-olds.
All right, that's fair. You're both correct, and I'm not arguing with what your points are there. I want to back up for a second and say, look, we're grading Brunette and Trotz. We started this show by saying massive success. First season, massive success. That doesn't mean that applies to next year or this offseason or 3 years from now. It's about looking at this season, and I should have been more. This is on me. I should be more clear about this. If we're going to grade Brunette and Trotz based on what we just saw for a year and give them extremely high marks, which we all did, look at Saros and go like, okay, not sure, B-. If you're looking at developing the young talent on this roster for just this year, looking backwards as a grade, not looking forwards at what could happen, it didn't happen. It didn't happen for the team, other than Luke Evangelista, which is a great turn for them to have figured out. But for those, if you told me that they were going to get literally nothing from those three players, Tomasino, Parson, and I'm not saying you're wrong as to why it happened, but it doesn't mean they're not going to be great next year. But like for this year, the development of the young players on the NHL level did not happen outside of Evangelista, and I would argue you could probably slide Spencer Stastny into that group.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but I think if we look at this big picture, because you said we can do that this week, big picture, yep. I think we need to look at Evangelista as the exception, not the rule. And I'm not saying that that's a good or bad thing, but with how quickly he was able to adjust, and mind you, it's not like he picked it up immediately. He had some he had some issues earlier in the season, and he did struggle a little bit. He acknowledged that. Andrew Brunette acknowledged that. Andrew Brunette benched him for a couple games because of that. And he was able to rebound and he was able to adjust. And that is great. And I'm not saying that guys like Parsonen and Tomasino will never be able to do that. It might just take them longer. And so if you're looking at, okay, developing the young guys in 1 year, I don't think it's fair to do that. I think with the amount that everyone had to adjust to this system. I mean, they're not all Philip Forsberg going out there scoring 44 goals. I just think that it's, it takes a lot more than people realize. Mike mentioned what Cody Glass said about I didn't even realize. I still remember back at training camp talking to Tommy Novak and Cole Smith, and Cole Smith might be the most physically fit human I've ever met. And even talking to him after one day of training camp, and he could barely breathe while he was talking to me. It's hard and it takes a lot, especially for these younger guys. And yes, Luke Evangelista got it, and he's going to be a great player, and I think that's fantastic. I love that for him. But I think that we need to not measure the other young guys against Luke Evangelista, because he is above average. We shouldn't use him as the standard. And I'm not saying
I agree. Off the charts hockey IQ, off the charts. That's what's helped him, I think, create the success he's had. I agree. We're not comparing each one of them to each other. I'm just saying at the start of the year, if you were to put the top 6 or 7 young-ish, inexperienced pieces that we would like to have seen developed, basically one of them developed. Novak proved himself, and Stasny probably kind of came out of nowhere, not nowhere, but wouldn't have been on that list. And now he's on the list. So there's positives in there, but by and large, none of the guys.
I'd also point out Parsonen still, even after last year, Parsonen has still not had a full year or a full season in the AHL. He's the one. I wouldn't say Stasny came out of nowhere. I think we could have expected that one. Parsonen is the one who came out of nowhere last year. And he had kind of that really exciting, good start. And we're like, oh, wow, this kid's going to be good. And he took a little step backwards this year. And that's okay. At that stage in his career, I'm not concerned about that.
I think, too, with Evangelista, we have to give him credit. He is better at picking up new systems and adapting to different coaches. He's better, and he can do it a lot quicker than your typical young prospect. And I think we saw that because, he was with London in the OHL, and then he had a 15-game stint with Chicago, and then he was back with London, and then he was with the Admirals, and he was with the Predators. That's 4 different coaches right there in different systems, and he's been able to pick that up a lot quicker than most. So I do think we can kind of think of him, to Emma's point, he's more of the exception, not the rule.
I agree.
We also got to keep in mind, too, Parsonen and Tomasino. Parsonen was playing in Finland. Then he had 10 games with the Admirals, 45 with the Predators, and then this year it was 36 and 44. He hasn't had stability. Tomasino, I would argue the same thing. He had almost a full NHL season, got sent down to the AHL. He was back up, back down, bouncing back and forth. And we got to keep in mind too, with guys like Parsonen and Tomasino, they were playing in the AHL last year when John Hines was the head coach, and Milwaukee tries to emulate what Nashville does. So the transition is seamless. And we saw this year, Carl Taylor, I think he said it was around 80% of what they run is Andrew Brunette's system, and then he has the 20% to have the creative freedom to implement what he wants. So I think next year will be more telling than this year, because this year they came in having years of John Hines and that coaching system, that defensive wait for the game to come to us philosophy. And this is the year they were told to go out and be more aggressive. And it's harder for a 22, 23-year-old to flip that switch and go from sitting back, waiting for everything to come to them, to going out and attacking the puck. And I think that's what fans have to keep in mind too. It's a learning adjustment for them. They're 22, they're 23. I don't even remember what I was doing. I was probably failing out of some of my college classes. I can't imagine the adjustment these guys are trying to have to make on the fly.
Well, look, look, again, you two are both right with your context and your nuance and all these. You're absolutely correct. Everything you're saying is correct.
I don't want to hear but. Just leave
Dale
it at
says,
that. No,
Dale says, I hate these excuses. They didn't show improvement. They didn't answer questions. Just face it. I think there's no other argument. You can't objectively.
Dale is 95% of Brett's Twitter.
They didn't show improvement. They answered questions. They didn't just. Okay, maybe they didn't show improvement, but they answered questions.
They answered one. 77 answered his question. They did not answer any questions about Juuso Parson and Philip Tomasino. They didn't answer questions about Cody Glass. They did not find out answers to those questions. It's okay.
Yes.
I'm not saying there weren't reasons, but
I'd argue they did find out about Cody Glass, because basically what I got from yesterday was if it doesn't happen for Cody Glass this year, like next season, like he's gone. The same thing with Tomasino. I don't think Tomasino is going to be here next year if Andrew Brunette doesn't want him.
People are looking for instant gratification. You can't say that they didn't get any answers. It's just they didn't get the answers that they wanted immediately. And I think that you need, like, the answers that we got is with a guy like Parsonen. All right, maybe we need to be patient, and that's okay. I'm
not denying that, but you did not get the way we got an answer on Evangelista, which, again, I'm acknowledging you guys are correct, is maybe the exception. But we got an answer that he belongs in the starting lineup as a full-time NHL player for the Nashville Predators' future. Full stop. Answer. Question asked, answered. Novak, 3-year contract, answered. I still don't think Stasny has shown enough to be like, oh, he's a top 4 blue liner. I think he's clearly going to replace Alex.
I vehemently disagree on that.
No, maybe you're. I'm just saying. I'm not arguing
carrying Luke Shen in that Vancouver series.
I'm not saying that's my opinion. I'm saying that you could argue that is you could say, look, the guy's never played a full season in the NHL. We don't exactly know what that could look like. We can all be very optimistic about that. That's totally fine. I'm not disagreeing with that. But to suggest that that one of the biggest storylines of this team coming into this season, number 1 is Andrew Brunette. Huge success, A+. Number 2, Barry Trotz. Huge success, A+. Number 3 was the goaltending situation. Kind of in the middle. Not sure, not bad, not great, but whatever, in the middle. Number 4, one of the biggest storylines of the entire team heading into this season was who is going to establish themselves as a full-time player for the Nashville Predators moving forward. And we did not get those answers. You're right. They might come next year. Or if they cut Philip Tomasino and Cody Glass, who's due $2.5 million next year, which I don't think is going to happen, then that'll be an answer. That'll be a bad answer, but at least it's an answer.
I would argue,
but they did not get answers on these guys.
I would argue we'll get those answers this offseason, because yesterday Barry Trotz talked a lot about getting faster in the top 9, talked about acquiring different assets and different things. He talked a lot yesterday, and the sense I got was there's a lot of work he's going to do with this roster. So if they go out and they get someone who has a lot of speed and a lot of skill in their game, I probably don't think that Parson or Tomasino starts camp on this roster. If they go out and they get it depends on the pieces they add, because it felt like Barry Trotz felt he doesn't have what he needs to have the roster he wants right now. So if he goes out and starts acquiring those pieces as opposed to promoting from within, I think that's your answer right there.
Yeah, and I think that, just looking at the young guys again, I would implore people to remember that if this year, like, the reason we saw as much of the young guys as we did last year at the NHL level was because everyone got hurt or traded, and like we didn't have a choice. And so now you have the choice. You have the choice to let them marinate with some herbs and spices or whatever you want, Braden. And I think that that's important. And again, if you were seeing a lot of Tomasino and a lot of Parsonen and maybe even some Kemmel or whatever this year, then that would mean that this team would be in a very bad situation. We wouldn't have been, even talking about the playoffs. They wouldn't have been sniffing the playoffs. Like, that would be where you're like, all right, well, season's over, so just give them a shot.
I guess I had much higher expectations then for some of those players to be a little bit more proven. Or in this case, again, the answer maybe is that they're never going to be capable.
And you have to accept that as an answer. Just because it's not the answer you want, it's still an answer.
So I agree. If Philip Tomasino is not on the team, like going into camp next year, I'm just going to use him as an example, then yes, they absolutely got an answer on him. And that's fine. And that's more important than not having an answer. With Juuso Parsonen and Cody Glass, I don't think we got answers. Those two guys. Now, I wrote down all the best. I wrote down the most important pieces in the playoff series, just as an exercise here. Ryan O'Reilly, Philip Forsberg, Ryan McDonough, Roman Josi, Gus Nyquist, Jason Zucker, UC Saros, the identity line, which I do think is a major answer that they found this year. I think that line is maxed out. I think they should be back. I think you should want them all back, but I think what they gave you this year is what they can give you at their best almost every year. So I don't think there's more room for them to grow. If that's a great answer that they got this year, then that's a great answer. None of those 3 guys are considered like the up and coming stars of the team that we would have talked about in the beginning of the season. They're all guys that absolutely work very well in Andrew Brunette's system and were amazing in the playoffs. None of those guys qualify as in this group of young star prospects that are developing into top line wingers and forwards and centers.
But like I tweeted at someone the other day, you can't have a team full of Philip Forsbergs. You need depth guys like that.
But the only name, if you write down the top like 12 or 15 players in the series against the Canucks, only Luke Evangelista is the guy from this preseason list of names that we would have put together of, hey, we need to learn if these guys are good enough to be starters. One guy proved himself out of the entire roster from the start of the season to the end of the playoff series. All the best players on the ice for the playoff series were all veterans, with the exception, really, of Evangelista.
Then that's your answer. The answer is Evangelista is the only one that's ready for this right now. We could be sitting here at this time next year, and we could be saying the same thing about Parson and Tomasino that we said about Evangelista. I think what Emma's saying is right. Just because the answer you wanted isn't the answer you got doesn't mean there's no answer. I think the answer is Evangelista. Is he ready for this? Yes. Is Tomasino and Parson in Glass right now? No. Could they be next year? Maybe. We don't know. We have to find out. That's why you play 82 games.
That sounds like questions that are not answered yet.
No, the answer
we don't know.
No, the answer to the original question, are they ready right now? No. Answer. Boom. Move on.
Evangelista, yes. Okay. Everyone else, no. That's the answer.
Well, again, I can't wait to see what they do with some of the young pieces in the offseason. If they move on from them, then we got answers. If they did not, then we haven't yet. We still haven't. It doesn't mean they're not going to be great next year. I'm not arguing that. Just like Andrew Brunette gets an A+ for this year, it doesn't mean he's going to get an A+ next year. Barry Trotz gets an A+ this year, doesn't mean he's going to get an A+ next year. The grades change when new stuff happens, and then we look at those things and we evaluate and we change our opinions. But let's move on real quickly because we've already gone long, and we appreciate all you guys in the comments here. I want to quickly run through this list because we're going to spend some time on the free agents. I know Barry Trotz alluded to sort of bringing a lot of these guys back, but I have a quick, I'm going to do this real fast and see if you guys agree, since you guys have disagreed with me for the last 20 minutes. Tyson Barrie, Anthony Beauvillier, Alex Carrier. No, and no. What do you think?
No to all.
Yeah, I agree.
So we'll go into more details about this, but that's a grand total of like $8.6 million between the three of them, or more than that even. I think it's like 10, 11 million between the three of them. I think Kevin Lingan is a maybe because I think he could be a trade chip based on how you evaluate Askarov.
Yeah, I would have said he was a no before the press conference yesterday. Now he's a maybe.
I think he's a maybe too, just because if he gets a starting offer somewhere, he's gone. But if he gets a starting offer from like maybe the Sharks, maybe it's more appealing to be on a playoff roster like the Predators.
So Jason Zucker is going to be 32 years old, or he is 32 years old right now. He was due $5.3 million. He signed a 1-year deal. So I am curious what you think. I would absolutely be interested in the Predators bringing him back. The question is at what cost? Is it, 2 years, $6 million? Is it 2 years, $7 million? Like, I don't know what the number would be, but I think he played very well in the system. I think he proved he's flexible player, versatile player, can score some goals, create some offense. He's not worth 5.3 per year. He's probably not worth a long-term contract, but I think that's a guy I'd like to see them try to bring back, depending on what the numbers look like. Is 2x7 an unfair, unreasonable number to think about for him, or is that like too much of a downgrade?
Oh, I would just say that he's not going to be back if he's asking for $5 million a year again. Like, that's not going to happen. But there is mutual interest on both sides. We confirmed that yesterday. So I think if he is willing to take something a little more team friendly, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I mean, obviously, it's not going to be like when the Predators first traded for him, I thought like, well, that's nice, something nice to help them in the playoffs, and then he'll move on. And he like definitely came in and exceeded expectations. And it's like, well, yeah, I'd love to have this guy back on the team next year, but not at $5 million a year. So I think I don't know if it's like 2 times 3.5, like you said. I mean, that's something I think that Barry Trotz might be willing to work with, especially with what he brought to this team down the stretch, but he's got to be willing to take that kind of a pay cut too.
I mean, he was better than Tommy Novak, and Tommy Novak is worth $3.5 million.
Well, yes, but
I know that's oversimplifying it,
yes,
but like
he was better than Tommy Novak over a small stretch.
I think the sweet spot for Zucker is $3.5 to $4 million. If it's any more than $4 million, I would be out. I don't think Zucker expects to come back and make $5 million next year.
Yeah.
I mean, he just turned 32. Like he's nearing the end of his career. I don't think he views himself as a $5 million player. I think he's quite realistic with where he is and what his value is. I think if you can get him for 2 years and $3.5 million each year, you absolutely you take that every day. Because to your point, he was better than Novak. And I think what I like about Zucker is you can put him on the second line, you can put him on the fourth line. You're going to get the same production out of him. He's someone whose game doesn't match the line he's on, if that kind of makes sense. Like if you put him on the second line, you're getting the same exact thing from him as if you put him on the fourth line. And the Preds need someone like that.
I also think when you get to that point in your career, like that age, it's more important to, like, if you're a 32-year-old like established veteran, you would rather have 2 years with less money than like 1 year with a lot of money, especially when, you know, you're established, you've got a family now, like you're not looking to try and move around, and you're not trying to be Anthony Beauvillier and play for 3 different teams in 1 year. So I think that for him, like any kind of tenure, and I say tenure with air quotes because, you know, tenure could mean 2 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that would outweigh, you know, immediate money, I think.
I mean, Beauvillier at 26, he can do that. He can move all over the country.
Yeah.
32-year-old, yeah, it's different. It's different. The 2 big yeses on the list, I think they're just straight up yeses, and that is Kiefer Sherwood and Spencer Stastny. Just absolute, just yes, get the deals done.
Yeah. From what Trotz said yesterday, it almost sounded like he had a contract ready to offer Kiefer Sherwood before the playoffs started, but he didn't want to overload him, and he kind of backed off of that. So I wouldn't be surprised if that deal gets announced in the next couple of days.
I was the one who asked Barry about Kiefer Sherwood at the press conference, and he almost kind of cut me off mid-question, was like, yeah, I know, we already talked to him. And it's like, oh, all right, well, we didn't know that. So I think it's like, and Sherwood's a guy who, like, you can absolutely get signed to a very team-friendly deal. So that's one that I like definitely see happening probably very soon.
Again, like they're in a good spot to continue the growth and the rebuild next year because your top line is set, your fourth line is set once you sign Sherwood, and you found a couple of other pieces in there. That's what makes, I think, Zucker so important, is that you need to find another piece that fits into the middle six. You're going to have Colton Sissons and Novak and Evangelista, but you don't know the rest of it. Not to go back to our previous conversation. We'll find out about the defense pairings here, but I assume that Carrier is gone and is not going to be brought back. So we'll see. The other thing to keep in mind here, of course, with the contracts and the money is that the Matt Duchene money goes way up this year. So they're actually going to have $11.75 million of either buyout or retained salary on the books. That's $4 million for Johansson, $250,000 for Ekholm, $2 million last year still on the books for Kyle Turris, the gifts that keeps on giving. And Duchene's number goes up to 5.5. So they got $12 million of wasted cap space this year. Something to consider as they move forward with some of these team-friendly contracts.
Consider about a Saros extension too.
Yeah, well, and there's a reason that I think it's Johansson and Johansson, Ekholm, and Turris all come off the books at the end of the season, which would then give space for the Saros deal in theory. The Duchene deal is going to stay bad for a couple more years, but Kyle Turris
gets to be the worst at the end of 2025. That's when it's $6.5 million.
The Kyle Turris buyout, I think, happened before the pandemic. That's how long I had, like 3 different jobs.
And it runs through 2027, 28. So get used to Kyle Turris being a part of this team for the next 5 years.
This is not the last year. Is there still more?
It runs through 27, 28.
Oh man,
it's the Bobby Bonilla of Nashville. I love it.
Okay. I'm a Mets fan. Settle down.
I know, that's exactly why I said
I know. All right. Well, thank you guys for the comments and for hanging out. And again, it's okay to be pissed off about the series and excited about the franchise. I think those are 2 separate things. And excited about the direction that they need to go in. And I think it's all good. Emma, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Emma_Lingan and at the Hockey News.
Michael?
And on It's All Your Fault with Gover
on
Mondays.
You can find me on Twitter at MGSports_, at Nashville Hockey Now, and all of Nashville Hockey Now as social media pages.
So we still have lots of other stuff to discuss, of course, with the NHL postseason still going on, Stanley Cup playoffs. We got roster stuff to decide. We got contracts to get into. So a lot more stuff planned for you guys. So as of right now, we'll continue to do these live and in living color. If you like it, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube, share it on Twitter and Facebook, and, of course, give us a subscription on the podcast feed as well. For Emma and Michael, I am Braden Gall. Thank you guys all for listening. Thank you guys all for showing up into the comments and hanging out with us. We do appreciate it. We will talk to you guys next week.